2-0 is 2-0 on one hand, but on the other hand, are we seeing signs of future issues? Welcome to the Voice for College Football. Appreciate you being here for our Oklahoma show that we provide each and every, typically on Friday. Please subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live, and the guy that makes it all possible for us, Jason Ray, of course. Jason, good to see you, man.
Good to see you. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing just fine. Comments and questions, folks, are welcome there in the chat. And of course, the super chat's available as well. I got to say, when I was watching, well, as you might imagine, Oklahoma Houston was not at the top of my prime time list of games. So I usually have two games that I try to focus on. Maybe there's a third game that I kind of peek in on, and it was not on the list. However, at 14-12 going into the fourth quarter, I thought, okay, I'm going to get over there, see what's going on. And of course, Oklahoma tacked on the safety, which was important from a scoring standpoint. Of course, it takes the field goal out of play, but it also from a possession standpoint is where safety really can kill a team, because then it takes the possession away from the team and gives it back to Oklahoma. And they were obviously eliminated a possession from Donovan Smith and Houston. What went through my mind, Jason, was when Oklahoma would have that one or two games a year where they wouldn't lose, but they would struggle with somebody who was a group of five or somebody in the Big 12 that they weren't supposed to. Well, back in the Lincoln Riley era, and before that, Bob Stoops, well, that meant it was going to be 48-45. This was the exact opposite. This is the new Oklahoma struggle, is that the defense is going to do the job, but it's going to be this painful grind of trying to see them churn out first downs or find an explosive play or do something on offense. And just kind of a different Oklahoma struggle than what we used to see.
It really is, Mark. And I think, coming into the season, there certainly was a level of, I don't know that I would necessarily call it concern, Mark. There was just a level of just curiosity, I guess is the best way to describe it, in terms of, what this Oklahoma team would look like offensively with, Jackson Arnold in game one making his second start in his career, and then the new faces on the offensive line and all of that. But I honestly, I don't think, Mark, anyone envisioned the struggle that Oklahoma has shown over the first two games. So Temple, the Temple game looked a little bit different, obviously because of the number of turnovers, right? So Oklahoma scored 34 of their 51 points against Temple, either directly from a turnover or following that turnover from Temple, and 7 of the 16 points from Houston. So if you look at the 67 points that Oklahoma scored over the first two games, 41 of those 67 are are based on turnovers. So it could even be a lot worse than what it's looked like, already, Mark. So I think I think there's certain areas of the offense that you kind of look at and pinpoint. Okay, is this more of an issue? Is this an issue based on the injuries? Is this an issue based on just the ability from a production standpoint, or are these issues related to just the ability for Oklahoma just to be able to be as good of an offense as they have been in the past? And so I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag, Mark. As you mentioned, Oklahoma's got some injuries on the offensive line. I think we talked about this before we went live. Some injuries on the offensive line and the wide receiver core. But again, I think there's Oklahoma's had a couple of games here where I would just say, Mark, there's been questions whether or not is Jackson Arnold the guy that can guide this team, in the SEC. He hasn't been bad, but I think there's some areas where he's missed throws down the field, and I think he's typical young player where he's just taking a little bit too long to process through his reads, waiting for his receivers to be open and then throw it instead of making some of those, you know, anticipation throws that you would expect here. I mean, as you have listed here, I mean, a 37.5 QBR and only 5.4 yards, per completion there, and so that's not that's not going to do it at Oklahoma. So, whatever you want to pinpoint, there's been a lot of there's just been a lot of inconsistent play. When Oklahoma just kind of charting the game from Houston, Oklahoma scored their 14th point with 12 minutes and 28 seconds to go in the second quarter. Okay.
Mm.
Oklahoma had 8 drives the remainder of the game, with a majority of the second quarter and then obviously the entire second half. Um, 6 of those 8 drives ended in punts. 1 was a missed field goal, and 1 was an interception. 45 plays for 119 yards, which equates to about 2.6 yards per play. And so, what's what's the reason for that, right? What's causing that? Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. The offensive line is banged up. Garen Hatchett is announced he was out for the year. He's probably was going to be he was looked at as probably a starter for this team. Um, and then you've got Branson Hickman, who was out last week. You've got Jake Taylor, who played a little bit, but still he was really banged up, and things like that. So you've got three contributors, that one has been out for the year, and the other two just haven't been able to play a whole lot. And so that's a little bit of what you can attribute. We talked a little bit about Jackson Arnold just not progressing the run game. They just don't look like they have right now, Mark. They just don't look like they have anyone that is a big time threat in the run game. Gavin Sawchuk, he looks a little slow. He just doesn't look like he's super in it. So this may be a situation where Oklahoma has to go to the youth side of things, not only on the offensive line, but in the running back room, in the wide receiver area. So I think, hopefully, I mean, from what I've been able to tell, I don't know. Um, I think the three biggest keys could be for this weekend against Tulane is the fact, do they get some of these key guys back? Andrew Anthony has been sort of MIA, played a little bit in the first game, wasn't really, a couple of passes went his way. I think he made one catch and then he dropped another one. Hasn't really been, doesn't look like he's fully back. Nick Anderson's been out the first 2 games due to a hamstring injury. I've heard conflicting reports. I mean, at this point, whether or not he's going to play or not. So, and then Branson Hickman, kind of the same thing. He played 10 snaps in game 1 against Temple at the center position, and so Oklahoma is right now playing probably their third or fourth string center in Josh Bates. So I think it'll be very interesting to see how that goes. But yeah, I mean, just some other things like just that you just see, it's very atypical for an Oklahoma offense. They're 80th in yards per game, 61st in rushing yards per game, 90th in passing yards per game. But I think probably the biggest stat that was really there for Temple, and it continued to be there for Houston, is third down conversion percentage. Oklahoma is 118th in the country, 19.2% conversion percentage on third down. And no matter what you do, that's not going to get it done. And so I think, when you look at this from a fan's perspective, Market, then you also look at it just kind of the media, or just a human being watching Oklahoma play football right now. You think about this, they're struggling, whatever it might be, due to injuries or youth or just whatever's happening on the offensive side of the ball. This is happening, and this is the area where you maybe maybe it's not really time to doom just yet or panic just yet, I don't think. But the fact is, the you've got these statistics against probably the worst team in the American Conference, one of the worst teams in the country. Like Navy probably could have won that game by 40 points themselves on Saturday. And then Houston, which looked horrible at home against UNLV in week 1. Probably, I mean, they're in the bottom part of the Big 12, so they got to get right immediately, right? I mean, I mean Temple is a really good. I mean, sorry, Tulane is a really good football team. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they probably outplayed Kansas State last week, and just weren't able to get it done late in the game. And we know about the rest of the schedule, so um, I think it's a critical week for Oklahoma to try to get healthy, to try to play with a little bit more consistency on the offensive side of the ball this weekend.
Jason, when you were running down those stats, that's the first thing that popped into my head. Those are the stats, and those are not Oklahoma stats. Those aren't average stats for the average offense in America, but those are those stats against those teams, against those defenses. And then you obviously got to that point because I thought um, that is what is just alarming. They didn't come out of the chute and play. If they would have played 2 top 40 defenses
Yeah,
and had those numbers, they wouldn't be good enough to go and then compete and win in the SEC. But against the two. Now, Houston, we'll see down the road in regards to their defense. They might be a
yeah,
capable defense. They did hold UNLV down fairly well, and
yeah,
then obviously gave Oklahoma fits. Uh, and these two injury positions that are getting hit, man, Deion Burks, good thing that they went out and got him.
hmm
Hit 9 catches, didn't create a whole lot of separation or in regards to big plays, explosive plays on Saturday, but still had 9 catches. And of course, a big game 1 out of Deion Burks. But this was a position group that maybe some teams would have thought, we're set, we're good, we don't need to go get anybody else. But they wanted somebody else that would provide bigger plays and had proven production. But their wide receiver core looked like the strongest position on the team. But
it did.
no wide receiver core in the country can withstand losing 4 of your top receivers.
Right.
And then the offensive line was at the other end of the spectrum in regards to, wow, this is the big concern. This is the big question mark. And you never want injuries along the offensive line. That is the worst place because
It
that can
is.
just dismantle the entire offense.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Those are positions, like you said, wide receiver was one of the strengths probably coming in, probably the strength of this Oklahoma offensive team. And, to your point, they've got 3 or 4 guys that either were hurt before the season or haven't been able to play up to where they're at now. I mean, I think if you get Nick Anderson back, and if you feel like I've heard varying reports on this as well, but Andrell Anthony, if he's somewhere near where he's been last year, then I think you've got a good core with Brennan Thompson and then Deion Burks. However, you're having to play some pups in the wide receiver group right now that just don't look like they're completely ready, ready to play. And so, and yeah, on the offensive line, it was already a concern. I mean, coming into the season with, replacing, 5 starters, 4 of your 5 starters, and now you've got 3 of those guys that were going to play have been played major minutes, major plays, snaps, are not haven't been there. And so, I mean, offensive line is an area where you've got guys that really need to create that cohesion together and play together. And so and what you're seeing, and Brent Venables alluded to this as much, just globally, around the offense, like we've got guys that aren't playing together. And so when they play in the game, this is what it looks like, not necessarily making excuses. So, I think it'll be interesting, just in this comment, Brent Venables did allude to Eddie Pierre-Louis, who is a guy that could possibly be ready for them to play a little bit in the interior. So that'll be interesting to watch for, just to see if he gets some playing time. There's some guys in the wide receiver core, that may get some PT, especially if Nick Anderson and Anthony's not ready, whether that be Jaquez Petaway. He's a fresh, I mean, he's a sophomore, but Zion Kearney, Ivan Carrion's a couple of guys that come to mind. But yeah, I mean, JJ Hester had a couple of key drops in game one against Temple and really didn't play a whole lot in game two. So, I mean, I think you just have to see what happens this week. But my gosh, Mark, I mean, Oklahoma was fortunate. Me coming in, watching this game, covering, I anticipated Oklahoma coming in against Houston and covering the spread and playing, getting back to where you thought they were, but instead it was the exact opposite. So this could go, and again, not dooming, not projecting really bad things, but if Oklahoma can get healthy and get some things right and show some improvement here, then I think that they could be on a good trajectory for the latter part of the year. But Mark, if these injuries keep on lingering and they struggle and they perhaps would lose or have a close game against Tulane, then you start looking at the rest of the schedule and where are the wins. I mean, you've really when you look at the schedule, there's some of these teams that are better than what we thought they might be. I mean, Tennessee looks like a national championship contender right now, right? Ole Miss, granted the competition hasn't been great. Ole Miss looks really good. Alabama's kind of been up and down in first two. Texas looks about as good or maybe even better than most people thought coming into the season. So I think Oklahoma's got 5 games against top 5 teams the rest of the year. So so I think the fact that this is moving forward in terms of the competition level will be very intriguing to watch this week as Oklahoma hosts Tulane.
Jason, here's a point spread angle on this matchup against Tulane and really what Vegas and how they approach things versus what's reality. And of course, they do it better than the rest of us because that's why they have all the fancy hotels and we don't, because I try not to overreact. But like you, I picked Oklahoma to cover the spread, the 27-28 point spread. Now, that wasn't an easy decision for me to make. I did think about it a little bit, but I thought, of course, you're going to look at the week one results. And even though Temple's awful, Houston played a legitimate opponent, not a great opponent, not even a Power 5 opponent, but they played a pretty good team that played in the Mountain West Conference Championship game last year. And they couldn't score. They lost by 3 touchdowns at home. And then Oklahoma did to Temple. Again, that's the Temple portion of it is not the impressive portion. It's that they didn't do what a lot of teams on their level would do and just kind of grind their way, sleepwalk their way through a 31-10 win, something like that. They put the throttle down there pretty hard and won 51-3. When Vegas puts this together, it's interesting to me because Vegas barely reacts at all. What they believe a team is barely moves from week to week. They're pretty stern on who they think a team is. And sure, the last week results does affect it. But if Vegas was simply going by, okay, Tulane blew out some FCS team, and then they had a double-digit lead on Kansas State, Oklahoma, you're talking about roughly the same team, at least as we evaluated it in the preseason and to date, roughly the 15th to 20th best teams in the country. And if Tulane's able to take them to a 4-quarter game and lose it late, and then Oklahoma's coming off a 4-point win at home against the Houston team that lost to UNLV. If you just looked at the 2 results and there was no predetermination of where these teams sat coming into the season, well, Tulane would be the favorite in this game, actually, just based on the two
Yeah.
results. And like you say, this Tulane team is no joke. They've obviously been able to transition well from Willie Fritz, who's now at Houston. There you go. Willie Fritz,
Mhm.
the engineer of the
Yep.
almost upset 3 years ago, 40-35, was the same Willie Fritz that was coaching this Houston team. And then you take Tulane and you figure, well, they lose their head coach, but John Summerall comes in from Troy, where he did an outstanding job there, winning 11, 12 games per year. He comes to Tulane, and again, they did blow the game, but they outplayed Kansas State. And so Tulane is not going to be a joke here, you don't think. One other angle on the betting note that may not have Sooner fans feeling extremely comfortable either. I went through and I counted the number of double digit underdogs that won Power Five games last year, and the number was 18 for the entire season. There were 18 games in which there was a double digit favorite that lost in the Power Five. In the first 2 weeks of the season, there's already been eight.
Wow.
Eight double digit underdogs have already won. And Tulane being a 13-point underdog, shoot, who thought Auburn was going to lose to Cal last week as a
Yep.
13 or 14-point favorite at home?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I don't know how many people watching here have had the opportunity to watch Tulane against Kansas State, but I watched a good part of that game, um, last week, and like I said, I thought Tulane looked like the better team for a majority of the game. Now, Kansas State was able to kind of flex their muscles a little bit in the second half offensively, but still, I mean, Tulane, Darian Mensah's the new quarterback coming in. Just a snippet on how good this kid is. You've got Ty Thompson coming in from that transferred in, a five-star QB, beat him out. Kind of the heir apparent to Michael Pratt was Kai Horton. Most people thought, I mean, he was going to be one of those two kids, and then Mensa, as a redshirt freshman, comes in and wins the job in the fall, and played really, really well against Kansas State. Only I think he threw for over. I'm picking up the stats here from that game, but threw for over 300 yards in that game. So this is a team, Mark, that's really talented. On the offensive side of the ball, Makai Hughes is I think over 1,500-yard rusher from last year coming um, in the game. Oklahoma fans will know they're the number one wide receiver for Tulane. Mario Williams, who left Oklahoma, um, went to USC and then over to Tulane. So, I think the big thing was the big plays that they were able to make in the passing game. As you can see, 18 yards per reception here from the receiving core. So yeah, it's going to be a big challenge for Oklahoma. A big like this team. This team is um, I would say exponentially better than Temple and Houston. So yeah, it'll be very interesting. I think the good thing, it's been a lot of offensive talk and kind of negative just in general, but I mean I think the positive thing for Oklahoma fans right now is the defense is over, and again, I take into consideration the teams that they've played. Both Temple and Houston have not been good offensively at all. But Oklahoma defense has done what they're supposed to do over these first two games, only giving up 7.5 points per game. The one touchdown that they gave up to Houston was really on a busted coverage confusion on the assignment. There, other than that, Oklahoma's been pretty solid. Defensively, not giving up, a touchdown, just the field goal against Temple, and then as we mentioned, um, the two field goals that they gave up here against Houston. Um, in this game. So, yeah, I think you've got to be happy with where Oklahoma's at on the defensive side of the ball. But again, a much different challenge, a much better challenge. Athletes are the athletes for Tulane are going to be much different, much better, particularly at the skill position skill positions versus what Oklahoma's seen the first two games. So it'll be a really good challenge, really big challenge for them as well. And I mean, I think Mark, another interesting point of this is how does Oklahoma play offense? Does Oklahoma, because this is something that Oklahoma is not. It's really the inverse of what Oklahoma's been used to over the last 10 or 15 years. Oklahoma, has relied on really just getting enough stops and turnovers, here and there, um, to be able um, to support that offensive team, right? But now it's the other side of the coin. So, what can Oklahoma's offense do to help them defensively? Whether this be maybe running more clock, not playing as fast, finding ways to, extend drives and keep the defense off the field and things, especially at least early on in the season while the offense kind of gets its sea legs, so to speak. So I think that'll be another thing that's interesting to watch in this game for Oklahoma.
Folks, we are available for your comments and questions on Oklahoma and Tulane. Anything having to do with the Sooners, of course, the SEC and the nation. We will leave or be monitoring the chat for your comments and questions. And until somebody brings us something on the Oklahoma side, we'll open it up to the rest of the SEC. Jason, yeah, so week 2 brought us the Tennessee result that you mentioned. And of course, they're the SEC opener for Oklahoma. And again, don't want to overreact. NC State's probably not a great team. Well, NC State's never a great team, but they usually, when has NC State over the last 6 or 7 years not been 8-4 or 9-3 under Dave Doran? That's pretty much who they are. They'll go into the ACC and they'll probably compete. Probably will not win the championship because they never will, but they will be one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the ACC. So I do think that Tennessee result is pretty valid. Missouri's got a date against Boston College coming up this week. That's the first decent game that they will be faced with. Of course, LSU's not until the very end of the season. And of course, it's funny how narratives break, because for me, USC is getting all this hype and all this love, and LSU's been a little dismissed. They're in the shadows now. Nobody's going to really bother them or think about them until they break out and beat somebody. But that was just down to the last play of the game, so that could have broken the other way.
Right.
And LSU was a preseason top 11 or 12 team. They'd probably be in the top 5 or 6 now, and USC probably wouldn't be ranked if that field goal didn't go through.
Yep.
Because they were at the bottom of the rankings, and the two teams could be exactly the same, but the rankings would have been completely different. Trying to think who else. Auburn. Wow. Well, they benched Peyton Thorne this week. And of course, that's coming up, I believe, after the Tennessee games, a trip to the Plains to take on Auburn. And you talk about a team that hasn't been able to throw the ball, not just this season, but last season they were horrific. And 4 picks by Peyton Thorne on Saturday, but he will be benched. So, yeah, there are other teams having their struggles, but it will be a challenge. Anything stand out to you, whether that be in the SEC or elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Mark, I mean, and I know Oklahoma doesn't face either one of these teams, but this is SEC related. The craziness that was, if you watch that Arkansas Oklahoma State game, like, and I was kind of like you. I picked 2 or 3 games that I'm watching. I've got 3 screens that I have, just watching, and the fact that Arkansas, I mean, the part of this is just mind-boggling. They had almost 700 yards of total offense. They outgained Oklahoma State by 260, 270, somewhere around there, and you find a way to lose that game. Like that would be a just for both of those teams, right? It would have been a huge win for Arkansas, right? Because Arkansas, like is a team that was picked for most people in the bottom portion of the SEC. Um, and then Oklahoma State's a team that is expected to compete in the top two or three of the new Big 12 this year. And so that was a big probably sigh of relief in Stillwater, being able to come away with a win in that game by being, severely outplayed a majority of the game. And then, I mean, just feel bad for Arkansas and that team. I think the only other team that you didn't mention, South Carolina, um, just had a very impressive win over Kentucky, 31-6, and which they just manhandled Kentucky's offensive line. And so for them, they struggled a little bit against Old Dominion in week 1, and then come back and be as dominant as they were on the defensive side of the ball. I think that'll set up a very interesting matchup against LSU this week. But yeah, I mean, I think you've got some varying levels of teams that are struggling and teams that are really just untested, right? Ole Miss has been untested. You mentioned Missouri, untested. Both of those teams have a little bit step up in competition against Boston College and then Wake Forest, respectively. But yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see once some of those teams have a go up in competition a bit, what that looks like.
We've touched on Tulane. Now let's take a deeper dive on the Green Wave. We got Steve Helwick checking in from SB Nation. You can catch his work at Hustle Belt and also Underdog Dynasty on SB Nation. Steve, appreciate you being here as always. I know you don't have too much time, but this seems to be one of the more intriguing upset possibilities for this week after, of course, we know what Tulane has been the last few seasons, and then we see them, of course, perform well for 4 quarters against a Kansas State team that's roughly, you would think, as good as Oklahoma.
I'm getting a lot of different vibes from this year's Tulane team and last year's Tulane team. Last year's Tulane team was really defensive driven, where they made the AAC championship and got 11 regular season wins, mainly by the virtue of the defense, because the offense wasn't working well. They never scored 40 points in a game last year. Michael Pratt was not posting as good of stats in 2023 as 2022. He was playing hurt for most of the year as well, I believe. So Tulane, they were kind of just pounding the rock and trying to finish games as quick as possible and trying to win like that under Willie Fritz in 2023. This year's Tulane team, they have an explosive offense. They had a quarterback battle go on all offseason with 3 candidates. And I think most people thought that quarterback battle was between former Oregon 4-5-star recruit Ty Thompson and Kai Horton, who he had several starts when Michael Pratt was injured. But Darian Mensah, the redshirt freshman, won it, and he can sling that ball. Last week against Kansas State, he had 19 completions. He had over 340 yards passing, which was more than Tulane had in a single game last year. So I thought his deep passing ability really kept Tulane in that game, had a lot of explosive throws early on. So I feel like this is a different Tulane team than the Willie Fritz ones we've seen of the past. And it even is different from the John Summerall teams that we saw at Troy. So this is a team with an explosive offense. Oklahoma fans know the name Mario Williams as he used to play for them, and he has been a perfect transfer addition to this Tulane team. Is just a deep threat receiver that can get significant gains, can get those home run plays, and Dante Fleming and Yoel Keith Brown have assisted in that as well. So I think this Tulane team is different than the ones that we've seen in years past. So it's going to be a Tulane explosive offense against a really good Oklahoma defense that's only allowed 1 touchdown this year.
So, Steve, since Tulane has taken somewhat of a transformation from defense to offense this season, do you think that they have the type of defensive personnel up front, especially, but playmakers across the board to give Oklahoma some problems? We know what the Sooners are struggling with right now along the offensive line and struggling to get first downs.
There's a couple. Tulane really has had its defensive depth gutted from the past few years. It's not a defense similar at all to the one that won the Cotton Bowl. But I think the strength of the unit is up front, where Patrick Jenkins, a 2-time All-AAC defensive tackle, he forced that safety in the Cotton Bowl against USC. huge presence, commanding presence down there. And I think that Patrick Jenkins is going to play a huge part in this game, especially if Oklahoma's still down at center with Branson Hickman being injured right now. So that could be a big matchup there in the trenches. Also, Aiden Huntington, he's a ULM transfer that he hasn't had a sack yet this year, but Tulane likes what they've seen coming with him coming off the edge. So that could be an area where Tulane does gain some push. But overall, I did not think they did a good job of stopping DJ Giddens in that Kansas State run game last week. So I do have some red flags and concerns about the defense right now. You're not going to get much out of a 52-0 win over an FCS school. I mean, we saw what South Alabama did last night. Those games are just lopsided by nature. But when you play Kansas State and you see Kansas State's explosive potential in the second half offensively, that's where you start getting a little more concerned about Tulane's defense. And this Oklahoma defense, they need a pick-me-up for sure. So I think they're going to try to change their strategy and see what works this week against the Green Wave.
And this is just one of the reasons why our official X account at the Voice of College Football follows Steve, is that he alerted us to that we were close to seeing the first 90-point game in FBS play since Fresno State in 1991 last night. And then I checked out the box score because I always figure when there's that odd of a score, well, I got to see what the offensive stats look like. And they weren't that overpowering, but, you know, obviously there was a pick six, there was a punt return TD, all those things get involved. But I also noticed that South Alabama missed a field goal, or they would have scored the 90.
Yeah, that was something last night. I mean, that's one of those games where I'm focused on Texas State, Arizona State. I'm focused on Dolphins, Bills, but you see that score just rising, and then you can't look away. You have to see how high it really gets before that game ends. So that was kind of interesting to see history get made last night, because teams don't even score 80 much anymore. It's only happened once since 2016 before last night.
Yeah, they had 52 at half, and usually, you know, Clemson had 56 at half last week, but usually the throttle goes down and you just got to cruise home and want to get on the bus. But they kept it going. Jason, anything for Steve before we let him go?
No, I think it's, I think the matchup is probably the best matchup is Oklahoma's offense against Tulane's defense. As you mentioned, Steve, Tulane maybe struggled a little bit against the run, specifically against DJ Giddens, and Oklahoma's been struggling offensively. So I don't know. I mean, I think this is a close game. I think I think the big thing is going to be does Oklahoma get healthy on the offensive line with Branson Hickman? Does Nick Anderson play from a wide receiver perspective? Are they able to get Andrew Anthony back in the mix, or is he still, kind of nursing that offseason ACL surgery? I mean, do you have I'll just be honest, the Houston game did not go the way that I anticipated it to go. Oklahoma struggled immensely on offense, just based on the way Houston played against UNLV. What kind of chances do you give Tulane to come in here and get a upset victory?
I don't know right now. I don't know if Tulane's defense can play the level Houston played at for 4 quarters. And if it wasn't for that controversial muffed punt in the opening quarter, I don't know if you believe Mekhi Muse touched it or not. I didn't see any angle that provided definitive evidence. Then Oklahoma has one sustained scoring drive the entire game, which is insane. Houston forced 8 punts on them. They got an interception. The defense just came up with routine stop after stop, and I'm loading it up right now. There was an interesting quote, I thought, from Houston's linebacker Michael Batten after the game about Oklahoma's offense under Seth Luttrell. He said, "Our plan was to stop the run and get them out of their RPO offense, so we know when they're passing and know when they're running. I thought we did that well. I really feel like we dominated them, and that's not an understatement. Get them out of their RPOs because that's their bread and butter. They want to get one-on-ones on the outside, but our cornerbacks locked them up. We brought pressure, we fit our gaps, and once we got them off our game, they really had no answer for us." So that was the confidence Oklahoma's offense inspired in Houston's defense, where they truly believed that they couldn't get anything on them, and they didn't for the final 2.5 quarters of that game. So Tulane can find some things on film and really limit that run game, because that's where it all started. Oklahoma averaged under 3 yards a carry. They weren't getting any push on the initial downs. Then what do you have? A 3rd and long where Jackson Arnold's going to have to test a pretty good Houston secondary on the outside. Now, I don't think Tulane's is loaded in the secondary. Bailey Despani, he's one name that you should probably watch this week from the secondary for Tulane, a veteran strong safety there. But if Tulane can really try to employ a similar game plan to Houston, then who knows what Oklahoma's offense looked like. Oklahoma went 1 of 12 on third down against Temple, so it's not like the units worked against other opponents this year.
What does the schedule look like for you this weekend, Steve?
My body needs a break. I really wanted to go to Texas State, Arizona State last night, but that's 3 hours there, 3 hours back, probably staying 2 nights in a hotel Wednesday night and Thursday night. It's too much. So for me this week, I'm just staying home for my hometown Bayou Bucket, covering Houston and Rice in that rivalry game, which unfortunately, that rivalry game's fading like many rivalries are these days. You Oklahoma fans know that with Bedlam being off the schedule this year. And it kind of stinks to see those local rivalries go away, but going to appreciate while it's still here.
Good stuff. Steve Helwick catches work there at SB Nation's Hustle Belt and Underdog Dynasty. Steve, always appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
There you have it. Yeah, I think Tulane's going to be a challenge here. I didn't know that many details about the Green Wave. I checked in a few times against Kansas State, but I can't say that I took too much away from that game other than looking at stats and knowing that, as you mentioned, Jason, they appear to be the better team for most of the game. So,
Yeah, they did. I mean, when you look at the stats, they outgained Kansas State by almost 100 yards, 491 to 396, and made some big plays through the through the passing game. They get, as Steve mentioned, they did struggle a little bit defensively, particularly against the run. They allowed 215 yards on the ground. So, I mean, this is probably a game where Oklahoma has a little bit of a better opportunity to move the ball. So I think that's, kind of weakness versus weakness and strength versus strength in this game when you look at Oklahoma's offense against Tulane's defense, and then vice versa. The other side, the strength of both teams respectively at this point, it seemed to be with Tulane's offense and Oklahoma's defense. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this game unfolds.
I can't imagine that there's another team in college football that has withstood this many key injuries this early. I have certainly not heard of anyone to date through only 2 games that has been hit as hard as they have at 2 position groups. So, all right, Jason, anything else you wanted to hit on?
No, I don't think so. Not necessarily. I mean, I think, like I said, with the non-conference game and a game like this for Oklahoma, it's really, you hate to say like something like this is a must-win, but I think this is, no matter what it looks like with the injuries and things like that, I think critical for Oklahoma to get out of here with a win, regardless of how it goes, how it looks, because of the schedule late in the season, Mark. And when you look at things like this, and if Oklahoma were to lose this game, then you go into the next. I mean, the rest of the schedule, obviously, but like particularly those next 3 games, hosting Tennessee, going to Auburn, and then Texas and Dallas. Like, you could see this game going the wrong. Or see, you could go the season going the wrong way, very very quickly. And so, it'll be critical for Oklahoma to get back in the. I mean, that game probably kind of felt like a loss to Oklahoma fans, like watching it last week. So just get to playing better and just the way that you would expect Oklahoma to be playing.
Oklahoma Tulane, 13-point favorite are the Sooners, 3:30 Eastern, 2:30 where it counts on ESPN. And it appears as though football weather has not yet arrived in Norman, 90 degrees on Saturday at game time.
Yes, it's the summer. I mean, the summer's not quite letting go, and fall's not quite getting here yet. It's been kind of up and down weather-wise this week, but yeah, it's supposed to be a little bit warmer on Saturday, unfortunately.
All right, Jason, enjoy the Oklahoma game and the rest of the action this weekend.
Absolutely, will do. You do the same.
All right, folks, we should be back next Friday. But again, please hit the bell for the notifications once you subscribe, and we will get that notice to you as soon as possible when we get together each week to talk Oklahoma football. We will see you next week.